Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Buggin', where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late-identified Black, gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and acceptance. I Must Be Buggin' is creating safe spaces, sparking conversations, and making sure our voices are heard. All right, welcome back to another episode of I Must Be Buggin'. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. As always, so glad that you chose to push play and be here with me. This is part 2 of an episode with my conversation with Dr. LaToya Hinton. So if you haven't listened to part 1, my suggestion is to go ahead and go back and listen to it. It is just the previous episode. If you're feeling adventurous, like a maverick or something, feel free to join us here at this part of the conversation and decide whether or not you want to go back. But, I'm going to just, let us jump into it. But first, again, let me introduce myself. If this is the first time that you're joining us, my name is Sheldon Gay, your host. I am a 42-year-old Black man. I have what some would describe light brown skin. I have curly hair on the top, so it's a little long, but not like past my ears or anything like that long. My hair is faded on the side. I have a little bit of a goatee with a mustache. I am considering growing in my sideburns. I go by the pronouns he and him. And again, I'm just somebody who's really excited for you to join me on this journey into neurodivergence. And so the last time that we were together, I was beginning to ask LaToya about her experience in the workplace and her thoughts on that. So, again, I was saying, this is a good segue then to talk about, what do you think are some of the common challenges that neurodivergent women in leadership experience, and what do you wish was different?
Yes. So I think in my early experience with leadership, I think I'll say I knew when I was training in so many different ways to be an educator, I knew that I had to set an example. I think that was number one. And I didn't know at that time that I had that I was neurodivergent. So I kind of just had this sense of accountability for my behavior and my actions. And I had this sort of complex at that point of I have to be a perfectionist. I have to show a particular level of expertise and confidence. And it was kind of what I was hearing from most mentors around me. Most seasoned educators were kind of explaining that to me. And they were kind of you have to have that persona, that sort of command of knowledge. And there's a lot that comes with that. If you don't present yourself in such a way, then, you might not be believable, or people might, kind of question whether you should be, in the role that you're in. And, you don't want all these kind of question marks to come up. So you have to kind of present yourself in a certain way. And you're going to be a facilitator, you're going to be facilitating discussion. And there's a lot that kind of comes with that. You have to be very respectful. It's a dialogue. So I think from that training early on, I thought to myself, wow, it's always a dialogue, right? Like I can't make it appear as if um, I know it all, because I definitely don't. I'm,
Right.
it's a lifetime of learning for me, just like it's a lifetime of learning for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, when I became kind of like a team leader, um, I had that sense of like, it's going to be a dialogue. I'm going to create this safe space so people feel like they can, you know, um, speak up and contribute, in the most
Mm-hmm.
creative way. And I,
Mm-hmm.
especially like when you're doing research, you want as many brains as you can to like come up with different ideas, or see like maybe there's like some sort of gap or blind spot in the data that you're going to be analyzing. Or
Mm-hmm.
how do you ahead of time, when you're creating your research questions, and maybe you're doing survey questions, you want to be able to make sure that um, you are like proactively reducing bias and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
you need like a lot of people who are kind of troubleshooting what particular problems might be ahead of time. And so
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to be just like the sole person like lecturing about something. Like it's a very much a dialogue, it's very much a think tank.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of felt like, in order to solve problems effectively, I need to um, be, a facilitator of like productive dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the kind of leader that I should be. But at the same time, I've got to kind of see whether or not folks need certain supports.
Mm-hmm.
So if I see, in terms of like skill sets, say somebody has, more experience with, qualitative research, for instance, and, they need help gaining some skills in quantitative, then I'm there to, fill in those gaps. I always saw myself as just kind of like a trainer and a facilitator
Mm-hmm.
of just like deep, conversation. And I think, all of these other kinds of things in industry, like, like efficiency, and like making sure that like you're doing performance reviews and short-term and long-term goals, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. I kind of learned that kind of stuff like on the job, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of went with the flow. But I think like my foundational knowledge in leadership was a little bit more based on like servant leadership. Like how
Mm-hmm.
do you set things up so that people feel like as comfortable as possible to express themselves, and not feel any sort of like shame, or
Mm-hmm.
like feel silenced in any way,
Mm-hmm.
feel like included and feel like they belong. I felt like that was the most important salient piece
Right.
of leadership for me.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, I think I'd love to work on your team, based upon all the things that you've shared, and certainly our interactions. I think it would be great. Are there, as you've moved through different roles, are there any particular things, and as you've done your work, right, like working with organizations, are there any things that you'd say that, again, are common challenges that, particularly, like I said, as a neurodivergent woman, that you'd say, you know, you kind of alluded to before that neurodivergent women or certain folks can be hard to um, identify, right? And because, again, the as we know, the general model for a lot of this stuff is little white boys, right? And that's it, right? And so it's like, well, if you don't fit that model, even, the joke that people say is like, you know just because I don't play with trains doesn't mean that I'm not autistic, right? And that's supposed to be
Right.
the thing. And even if I do play with trains, right, like, okay, cool, but like, if I don't, that's not the only flag, and that's not the only way to understand my experience. And I know, again, that there may be some challenges
Mhm.
that you've run into, and some things that you say, if and when I go to, whatever this next organization, um, I wish that, I hope that this is not something that I'd have to face, if that makes sense.
Yes. So I have re examined some of my experiences of the past
Mm,
after kind of coming to the realization. I took the RADS R, which is an autism assessment for high masking people.
mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I scored really high. No surprise. And it made me really do a lot of self reflection and say, I may have been misinterpreting certain experiences that I had in the
Mm-hmm,
workplace.
mm-hmm,
And one of the ones that I've kind of reconsidered very recently is when I was instructional designer. And this was during the pandemic, so it was highly stressful. um, in many ways, I think it really brought out the best in me in terms of like project management, time management. I really
mm-hmm,
had to um, stick with some strong kind of structures
mm-hmm.
and really set a good example for other people who are working on teams with me. And I had to be extremely flexible. So I think in some ways it really brought out the best in me.
Mm-hmm.
But in other ways, uh, I can imagine that I probably overshared a
Mm,
lot when I
mm-hmm.
initially met with some team members.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not typically something when we talk about intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you've got a very confident woman of color
Mm-hmm.
oversharing about what
Right.
she's passionate about, and that may rub folks the wrong way because
Yeah.
they may first, number one, feel very intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
They may have not been in an environment where they've worked with someone like me before.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's kind of a lot to sort of unpack there because I would never want to be less passionate
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about my work, and I would never
Mm-hmm.
want to silence myself
Right.
or tone police myself.
Right.
But at the same time, I think there are some social conventions of
Uh-huh.
realizing when you meet someone for the first time,
Right.
it is a slow progression
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much you share with them. And so looking at it from that perspective, I think if I were to be in a similar environment again, I think I would, probably reel it in a little bit. And I think I
Yeah.
would take it a little bit slower in terms of, um, trying not to overshare. And if I do, being a little bit more aware and kind of telling people I tend to overshare. I'm sorry. I
Mm-hmm.
want to hear your perspective. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really huge thing to reverse it and say, it isn't all about me. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
really want to hear your input. And it's going to be the most productive if we have established a safe dialogue. And so I think, like, in terms of like leadership, that's what I'm always hopeful for.
Mm-hmm.
I think on a personal level, it's just about me kind of doing a little bit of self-reflection and being a little bit more open about having those kinds of patterns in
Yeah.
communication,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that, and it's great to have those. Again, it goes back to this whole thing of like the two memories of things, right? Because I mean, even for me, I reflect on my time in corporate, and knock on wood, I never have to go back to corporate because it's just not for me. I cannot, I can't. But that's a complete aside. What I'm just thinking about are the times when, particularly again, I literally never was aware of my neurodivergence while I was in corporate. So that meant that I spent the entire time having no reflection on, like, even if you told me, hey, Sheldon, um, you know, you're, I'll just use a word, overcomplicating things, right? For me, that felt like just you're, either you want me to dumb it down because you don't think that I know what I'm doing. It was a completely different perspective. But if I can reflect back, there are opportunities to say, oh, well, you know what? For them, this experience, what feels like kind of like base level for me, or just kind of like what is the right thing to do for me, feels super overwhelming for them.
Right.
And now I can own my piece of that and say, you know, again, maybe we still end up finding a way to do whatever, all 15 things, but maybe I chunk it down, right? And this is how we interact with it because now, again, we're still getting to the 15 things, but now it doesn't feel like the mountain that it can feel like for other people. Or I know this is particularly true for me when it comes to complexity, where again, I might be able to see all the threads and how things come together.
Right.
It may take folks a while to make those same connections and not
Right.
taking it personal because they tell me I'm not making any sense. And I'm like, well, again, making it personal, it's like, oh, I get it. Let me find another way to explain this, right? And maybe that might mean me taking time to go back and think about how to explain this differently. But there's certainly a lot of ways to kind of reflect upon those things. And I think, again, just briefly, as I think about as well, what I am working to preach to people in organizations, as you like, I'm trying to think of what I saw the other day, but it was something that like just, excuse me, it just resonated because I had thought about it before, which was the issue isn't that people should have to identify as neurodivergent before you try to provide them accommodations. You should be
Right.
building your spaces to make sure that nobody technically has to say anything to you, right?
Right.
And as well, how do we build curiosity into spaces so that, when, as you said earlier, before they get to burnout, we're already so curious about what's happening with them. And again, you don't have to tell
Right.
me, you know, my grandmother in the hospital, and you don't have to tell me all that necessarily. You're welcome to, right? But like, if you simply just told me, hey, I got a lot going on
Right.
personally, and blah 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 blah, I can then, my mentality is to shift to say, how do we support you, right? And
Exactly.
not be like, you showed up late and this, you're a bad employee. You didn't do this up to your usual standard. You must not care about this company. And it's like all these different stories that people put on top of stuff, as opposed to being curious. Like, wait a second, LaToya, you okay? Right? And
Exactly.
and
That
so go ahead. Go ahead.
human that human humanistic way of looking at it. It's like a holistic
Mm-hmm.
view on
Mm-hmm.
what's going on instead of just kind of looking at a symptom of
Exactly.
what people are experiencing, because it's usually a lot deeper. There's
Mm-hmm.
usually a lot kind of going on below the surface that people, understandably are uncomfortable about talking,
Yeah.
about all of the intricacies. And but I've definitely had people on my team before say, I have a lot on my plate,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to best help the team. I've had folks like very in such a polite way say,
Right.
I'm over here, I could use some support. And I would just step in at that point in time and say, let me actually help you to
Right.
complete some of these things. And I think that's a true team, right?
Right.
That where you're like, well, I happen to have a little bit of extra time, and I understand, the issue of people being, compensated for the amount of work that they're completing, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But I think that there's like kind of a human level to sort of what's going on as well, and things can be shifted. When
Yeah.
you're a project manager, you can, you can, like you said, you can break up the projects into smaller pieces. You
Mm-hmm.
can, kind of shift things around, shift different people onto projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is just kind of different ways to make sure that people feel supported, and that in itself is an accommodation. I think just people in leadership who are flexible, that in itself is an an accommodation on its own.
Yeah, no, I think about my last job, and one of the challenges was, I'll just say, the varying degrees that certain people had for that flexibility. Um, you know, they were very good at, for example, that was the first company that I worked at that had unlimited PTO. Um, and they generally didn't stress people about, you know, taking a day off, or if you needed to, if you planned it out, right? You said, okay, I'm going to need a week off in whatever, August, right?
Mhm.
Um, Again, if you got your work done, if you kind of planned it out, like they're not, looking at, well, Sheldon, what about 3 days? It's like, no, no, no. Like they just generally didn't do that. Um, you know, uh, and there, like I said, there were other things, like even around, remote work. Like there were a lot of good things, but there were certain things as well where a lot of that kind of, I'll just say, restrictive model was still in place in people's mentality about stuff, and whether or not it was spoken overtly, it was certainly there as an undertone. And I haven't worked there in, over 3 years. I hope that some of that stuff has improved, but I think that, again, um, the more that we recognize that truly having a team, there's always that joke too that people talk about. It's like when companies start talking about this is a family like run. And I think the reason why that is because a lot of times what people mean by family is the toxic form, where it's, you're supposed to do anything for your family, without question, and to your, even if it's to your detriment, right? And it's like, no, like that's not, you don't try to like rope me in with the heartstring around me letting everybody else down. If I'm burnt out, if I'm like doing, you know three people's jobs, like, we need to address this, right? This
Right.
team, it's not sustainable. Like, I can take over a few things for a little bit, but once that becomes, whatever, 6 months or whatever, right? Like, now we're talking about not just kind of helping out, we're talking about, just a different thing. And so, um, yeah, I'm hoping that with folks like you, kind of either directly managing folks, but also kind of advising other organizations, that kind of stuff is, um, less common, because that needs to be the future of work.
Right.
You might convince me to come back to corporate if, like I said, if I was working on your team or working, working with you, like, I might be able to come back to corporate, but I haven't seen, many
It's very
spaces.
rare. I think
Yeah,
it's
it is.
really rare to see like people, managers that are really um genuinely concerned
Mm-hmm.
about their team members. And but I would say the flip side is that if you are genuinely concerned, you typically have less turnover. You
Mm-hmm.
typically have much higher retention,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a ripple effect in everything else.
No,
And
absolutely.
like you can even boil it down to like your revenue and
Absolutely.
certain departments. So I just think it's just one of those things where it's about thinking about the short term versus the long term. And if
Absolutely.
you really are trying to help your team members to grow professionally, then you're going to do that like level of mentorship where you really do care about them, and
Mm-hmm.
you really do like kind of make sure that you're taking like this holistic view and make sure that they know how to balance when they have a lot on their plate, and
Right.
know who to turn to when they need support and have the accommodations that they need.
Yep.
Because I mean, if you're going to kind of just treat people like they're expendable, then they will be
Oh
expendable.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll expend my behind right out the door. And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
and that. But I think that's, again, it, like, without even getting into deep into like capitalistic structures. Like I was saying, that I was actually on a call earlier for the indie focused nonprofit that I'm on the board of, and one of the things we've been talking about is, even when you live in a co-op or something like that, like there's still, everybody still has like an individual responsibility, right? If we were on a farm together, I can't just throw up my hands and say, well, you know what, I'm not whatever milking the cows anymore, and that's it. It's like, well, somebody's got to milk the cows, somebody's got to take care of the chickens, somebody's got to, like, and sometimes, again, temporarily we can kind of help you out, but at the same time I still have to own that as my responsibility, and you know understand that this is how I'm contributing. And then when a manager recognizes how all those pieces fit together, again, now it's about shifting. How do we as a community get this thing done versus just, you know Jimmy, you're letting everybody down and that's it. um I'm certainly about results, and again, even in the wild, like, if you don't kill, you don't eat, as it were. Like, that's the phrasing, right? It's like there's still fundamental laws about that piece, but it doesn't have to be um, in a system that completely strips away people's humanity. Um, and so actually, this is maybe kind of a talking about stripping away humanity, and kind of go into this next question that I can't let you get off the call without talking about, which is, tell me about your thoughts about responsible AI development. And like, you know um I know a lot of people throw AI at a problem and think, oh, because there's no humans involved, that means that everything will be perfect because it's a computer doing it. So
Right. I was anticipating your question, and so I have kind of a short and sweet,
mm-hmm.
if that's possible for me, answer.
Go
I'm gonna go like as fast as I can.
ahead.
So I think one of the first things is understanding how to pinpoint vulnerable populations that may be affected by your AI model deployment ahead of that deployment,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
then knowing how to deconstruct causal assumptions. So,
mm-hmm,
troubleshooting possible assumptions of how a complex system works. Like, for example, if you use counterfactual data analysis, say, for instance, you change one factor, such as gender, race, or disability, and see if the model produces different results or
mm-hmm,
if it produces the same results.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I have something kind of personal to talk about with this. I recently was looking at a couple of dashboards on Tableau Public um, that were focused on publicly available data from my city that I'm in right now, which is
mm-hmm,
Hartford, Connecticut.
mm-hmm,
And I could point out lots of like biases and blind spots in the data like right away.
mm-hmm,
So one
mm-hmm,
of the dashboards was on like voter registration based on income and educational attainment level.
mm-hmm,
And I could easily think about groups of people who may not be civically engaged based on those factors,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
but like their level of education or income, but they might be civically engaged based on like their job insecurity, or if
mm-hmm,
they're like worried about things like women's rights.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there could be other reasons for why, sort of at the last minute, you get a ton of folks starting to register to vote.
Right, right, right.
And then another one of the data sets was kind of focused on the most popular new industries in the city.
Mm-hmm,
And I didn't really see a lot of filtering for like race and gender there either. So I was kind of like left wondering, like, are these the most popular industries, like for just like Caucasian owned businesses,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
or like I would have liked to have seen it drilled down a little bit to see like more like Black owned businesses or women owned
mm-hmm,
businesses, especially after like the COVID-19 recovery,
mm-hmm,
because those businesses not everybody recovered at the same rate, right? And so there were probably a ton of new businesses that kind of started up, back in 2018, 2019, before the pandemic started. And then, like, I'd love to see the percentage of those that were Black owned, the percentage of those that were women owned, that are still thriving today after the pandemic, right?
Right.
So
Right.
just things like that. So I think if somebody were to create an AI model kind of based on the two data sets that I saw, without recognizing the gaps in the data, they might have like some inaccuracies. And so a lot of times when we talk about responsible AI, you kind of want to bring in like social scientists, that may be able to kind of help you see where the biases are, maybe blind spots, maybe thinking about how to add in data that maybe is missing in your training set. And I think that really helps with your models, your AI models adaptability. And also, like, if you have the ability to test your AI model in like a simulated environment where you can, like, change different factors, or like add in data or take out data, and like just kind of see how it performs before you deploy it in a real world context,
Right.
I think you can also illuminate maybe some blind spots or some gaps that you didn't realize existed. And really, this is not any different than like usability testing. Like, if you imagine that you just created an application and you just wanted to see what some of the pitfalls of it might be ahead of
Right.
time before you launch it. I don't see that as being anything really different,
Yeah.
than just doing a usability test, right?
Yeah. No. I First of all, I love that because I wonder how many people automatically made that connection. I'm with you 100% because it is it fundamentally it's not about, you know, each of those individual tasks unto themselves. It is about this question that you're asking yourself about what are the implications for what I'm putting out there. And um a lot of people, they again, this is why, as much as my mind is uh can be a challenge sometimes, this is why I love having access to it, because it's always about thinking. It's not just the thought, it's about why am I having this thought, what is the thought that I'm maybe not aware of. And I'm not sure if I shared with you this before, but first of all, shout out to the Design Justice Network and all the folks who have signed the tenets or whatever, the principles, I'm sorry, and who are doing that kind of very mindful inclusivity work. But also, like I said, thinking about the tarot cards of tech, which I
Right.
think I might have sent to you, but
You did.
yeah. And like, again, how do I make sure I'm asking these questions every single time I'm building something? Because I'm always going to have something. For example, I am not at this time, right, physically disabled. So
Right.
the way that I move through the world, I might not think about the height of some a table or something like that, or I might not consider um just so many different things, like I said, without kind of going to every single example, right? But if I'm asking myself that question, that might mean reaching out to a friend who can speak to it, or making sure that I have a
Right.
focus group of people who
Yes.
can speak to that. But it is really a fundamentally important thing, because I think a lot of folks, it amazes me, I'll just say, how many people are just not aware of the bias. Like, to me, it feels like basic biases around things, and then they just build stuff, and then they're like, "Wait, why are you guys so upset?" you know, why? And it even goes back to, like I said, from a usability testing perspective, there are
Right.
people who are like, "Why are people not using this?" And it's like, well, yeah, again, you've got whatever maybe you have the 5 buttons you need, but you've made them so hard to understand that
Right.
people are getting stuck.
Hmm.
And um I'll just say lastly, because I just remembered you talked about bringing in a social scientist. This is why
Yeah.
I'm such a big STEAM proponent, And why, for
Yes.
example, like frankly, why in undergrad as a mechanical engineer, a lot of my electives are things like deviant behavior and critical reasoning and
Right.
ethics and all this other
Mhm.
kind of stuff, because I've always had this mind of like, I don't want to just build stuff. I want to be mindful about,
Right.
its
The
impact. And
impact.
yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
So um yeah, so kind of starting to round out the convo. um I wish that we, again, every time we talk we could talk for forever, but um I'm just thinking about leaving folks with some of the nuggets that you have in your mind as it relates to the neurodivergent experience. So um you know what are, one to two things that you think are important for folks around, healing and thriving as a neurodivergent person? Like, what are maybe some tips or some lessons that you learned? Like I said, just a couple of things that you may have had on your mind.
Sure. So a lot of it, I think I kind of touched on a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
topics in the workplace that kind of create these safe psychological environments. That is
Mm-hmm.
definitely a healing space when you have um, leaders that are empathetic and understanding. That
Mm-hmm.
definitely helps. Um, I think having access to neurodivergent affirming mentorship is
Mm-hmm.
really, really
Mm-hmm.
huge. And communities that can support you holistically
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
are super, super important in the healing process. Um, Patience. So I'm saying for yourself, for
Mm-hmm.
the point in the journey that you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Self compassion and forgiveness are really,
Absolutely.
really huge in the healing process. And also, like forgiving others who really, didn't understand you or just didn't
Yeah.
have all of the information at their
Yeah.
fingertips to be able to, you know, um, create a space that, would be less harmful. I think that's something that we don't talk about in society very much at all, because especially in the United States, we're so like divided, and
Mm-hmm.
like I think forgiveness goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that you should be like submissive in any way and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
forget things that
Right.
have
Right. Y'all can't
affected you.
see her face, but I'm laughing because I see her face. Yeah, we're
But I think it's a logical conclusion to realize that um, not everybody takes these deep research dives and learns everything that they possibly can about
mm-hmm.
something that is not really affecting them.
Right.
I think a lot of people just look for practical solutions
Mm-hmm.
that they can easily remember, that are going to apply to a large number of people, and it doesn't always work that way.
Right.
um, but I think that's what a lot of people are kind of looking for, because they may feel like they're pressed for time, they may feel just kind of overwhelmed in general with everything that they're focused on in their life. And if they really care, they'll take the time, right, to really learn about neurodivergence. But I think that there is this level of forgiving folks and saying, I need to be a self advocate. I need to be a little bit more assertive about what's going to, allow me to thrive. And so I think it's a two-way street in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways. Um, and I think that self empowerment and that self advocacy for
Mm-hmm.
me has always helped me in the healing process.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I know I'm not a superhero whatsoever, but I think that, knowing that I have, agency to, make decisions that will, positively impact my life and positively impact other people has always been something that is just super, super healing for me.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, and I just want to go back to that forgiveness piece because I think it is really critical. I know in my journey, one of the biggest pieces has been, again, oh wait, like this thing that I did spend hours and hours and hours digging into, not everybody has, and
Right.
so that speaks to that difference. And you know again, all the different ways in which um you realize you can just give grace. And
Yes.
I do love that part about, and I'll go back to a word that you used earlier that is one of my favorite words, is a boundary, right? Like there's still
Mhm.
a point at which it's still important to have boundaries.
Right.
I this week had a very important conversation with someone in my life that um did involve offering a lot of grace, but it was also there was a very clear boundary about how we would go forth interacting with each other. And it was important for both of our you know experience, right? And most importantly, again, what you were talking about, this sort of never lose sight of self, I think is really important. And that was, like I said, something else that you spoke to. I think that as neurodivergent folks, in whatever flavor that may be for an individual, one of the things, if you're used to masking, you're used to probably people pleasing and
Right.
conforming, and therefore losing yourself. And when you kind of flip it on its head and say, I'm going to center myself and my needs, and that doesn't mean I am what's the word I'm looking for? Like yes, technically it's actually the reverse. I'm going to say it's not being self-centered. Even when you center yourself, it doesn't mean self-centered. Those are two different things, right?
Right.
And understanding that distinction is super super important because the only healthy way for you to move through the world is with understanding that if you aren't okay, you're not going to be able to show up in the way that you want for everyone else. And then again, nobody ends up winning. So I think that those are, really important points for people in general, but particularly, um, I would say intersectional neurodivergence. You know what I mean? Like I think it's really really important. Um, so again, you've talked about this, and even now we've kind of talked a little bit about this. But are there any other things that you'd say that you wish that the world built capacity for, that or that just knew about, you know, your experience, or like I said, the experience of people like you? Is there anything that you'd say you wish that the world knew or built capacity for?
Um, I definitely think um, I think it's very dangerous to like judge someone like just
Mm-hmm.
based on their neurotype,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know them personally. And um, I think it's super ableist actually
Mm-hmm.
in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of ways, like when you don't know what people are actually capable of accomplishing,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes these labels can be like very stifling.
Absolutely.
And we talked about it a little bit earlier on, but I do want to stress that enough, like so that people don't ever kind of forget
Mm-hmm.
that it's very dangerous to kind of rope everybody into the same category. And I've heard it a lot in a lot of um, neurodivergent affirming podcasts and lots of videos and things like that, where people will talk about their own experience and they'll
Mm-hmm.
say, please don't compare my experience to other
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
like if you met, one AuDHDer, you haven't met
Mm-hmm.
all the AuDHDers,
Mm-hmm.
like just try to kind of like not do that, because I think that that is a really dangerous path to go down, because my life experience is so unique, and there's so many nuances that I think it's very difficult for me to, you know, impose my value set even based on my experience on other people. I think it's great to appreciate the similarities,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
even laugh about those similarities sometimes, and
Mm-hmm.
make light of things that may have caused you difficulties. I think humor is always a super awesome
Right.
thing to practice. But I also think that I never want to meet someone and say, well, since you talked about a few traits that we have in common, then I know everything about you, because I definitely
Absolutely.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for saying that, and it reminds me again. Like I say, like labels don't have to equal pathology. I think a
Yes,
lot of
yes.
folks, they just think that, again, here are these traits. Here, this. Like, I know that you're dyslexic, so you don't even. I don't need to hear anything else. I already know you'll need these five things, and it's like, well, maybe not, right? Particularly if I know that this is shout out to Dr. Joy Lawson Davis, who, talks about, 3E, right? So being three times exceptional, which includes the giftedness, includes, some other form of neurodivergence, but also has this, what I call melanated and marginalized community component, but like this other intersectional component, right? But like, you never know how someone's dyslexia or whatever will present in their life. And we talked about that earlier. And that's why it's so important to say, okay, I have this label, and it gives me kind of for me, it's more sort of like a guidepost, or like a way finder, but it is not the destination. It's not the topography, right? It doesn't tell me everything about what's going on with you. But if I'm curious enough, I'll follow the path and get there and say, okay, tell me, more about that. Right. And that's where real connection and real relationship and real understanding of people comes. And so I'm 100% on board with that. Um, yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. Um, so yeah, so, before we go, let's make sure to, tell us about, any projects that you've got going on, or how people can work with you and just stay connected.
Yeah, so um, I created this website called techccessibility.info, and so it's kind of like a mixture of tech and accessibility.
Okay. 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 Makes
And
sense.
it was originally just kind of like a WordPress blog, but
Hmm.
then I just kind of created a whole bunch of pages
Hmm.
talking about my work, and that's like UX research, a little bit in terms of case studies looking at creating ethical AI models. There's kind of a little bit of everything that I talked about
Hmm.
on this episode is on that site, if people kind of want to look a little bit deeper and kind of understand a little bit more my positionality to those topics. And I would love for people to check out um, my LinkedIn profile. I believe it's just um, LaToya Hinton, data enthusiast. And you know
Mm,
how
yeah.
the LinkedIn kind of has like the dashes in between instead of
Right.
spaces.
Right.
And that site, if you are a person who identifies with she, her, or they, them
Hmm.
pronouns, I would love, and you also are neurodivergent, I would love for you to join our group,
Hmm.
Neurodivergent Women Leaders Creative Mentorship and Support. And that's a
Hmm.
LinkedIn group. We just have so many different interesting topics, in the workplace and out in the community and your family that, can help you to thrive. And we're just slowly growing. I just kind of created the group back in March, and now I think we have something like 83 members or something like that, and it's July. So I assume that, more people over time will be interested. I kind of poll every week on LinkedIn, and I ask lots of different questions about neurodivergence and about leadership, and definitely like the servant leadership. I am always kind of plugging those topics, strengths-based approaches, empathy and compassion in the workplace, that kind of stuff. And, it's gone over really well. Like I've gotten, tons of people really interested in, having awesome conversations in the comments, and, sharing with their connections. And, it's like, a handful of folks join every week, and it's just awesome. Like I love that level of advocacy, and it just kind of fuels me every week. And I just invite anybody who's interested. And if you have any questions about like being in the data space, but like in different sectors, in industry, in nonprofits, in the public sector, like I've kind of dabbled in a lot of different areas. So I definitely would, love anybody who's starting out in their career to kind of reach out to me and ask me questions. I'm still learning, but I still feel like I can contribute to helping you, learn where your best fit is, where your niche might be.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely put that, those links in the show notes. So definitely y'all please reach out. And I mean, again, I know that actually, LaToya, I got some things that I might chat with you about working on, but thank you so much for making the time. Thank you so much for sharing your story. This is definitely, like I said, been a great conversation. And then, like I said, we'll probably have to find a time to bring you back on, because there is, like I said, so much more to chat about, and there's such a good overlap here for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sheldon. I really enjoyed myself, and it was just a pleasure to, get to know you better and be able to, express myself in the most authentic way. So it was awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be Bugging. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be Bugging, where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Leave a review and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be Bugging community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.